Howdy, y'all, and today we're going to be talking about the Roaring Twenties. So, the Roaring Twenties is a consumer revolution. People are buying up household goods with electricity in almost every home. Americans are now buying radios, dishwashers, record players, vacuum cleaners, all of your regular household goods. These are being peddled by magazines, advertisements, and newspapers displaying the products. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the beginning of credit in America. Originally called installment buying, where you can buy it now and make small monthly payments throughout, this is the origins. It is not just household good, it applies to larger goods such as the automobile industry. Henry Ford does not invent the automobile, but what he does do is make it affordable using a production known as the assembly line, where one worker is responsible for one piece on a car. He can make the Model T affordable at a whopping $316. To add on top of this, he pays his workers a astounding $5 a day. He gives his workers 2 days off, which is brand new and unheard of to have Saturday and Sunday off at this time. And the reason is he believes that if he pays his workers well, they will buy a car if they have time to use one. So he gives them an extra day off so that they can spend their money. Now, this system of mass production and mass consumption is only effective if you have great oversight over it into a scientific management. Okay, you must streamline control of the resources and production all the way to the shelf in order for it to sell. People are now buying household goods, stoves, coffee pots, and refrigerators, and this is a change in what America is producing. Now, the Roaring Twenties is post World War I. We get a man by the name of Warren Harding elected to office, and he calls for a return to normalcy for regular order. But the get rich quick attitude in the air infects his administration. He surrounds himself with private sector people, and they are pushing for private gain using public office, almost reinstating the spoils system. One of the most notorious scandals is that one of his cabinet members accepts a $500,000 bribe from a businessman to give them an oil reserve owned by the government in Teapot Dome, Wyoming. This is a huge scandal and one of the first of the time, and this is the beginning of mistrust in elected officials. He serves a whopping one term in office when we get a man by the name of Calvin Coolidge, a man of few words coming into office. A news reporter once bet him $40 that she could get him to say more than 2 words. His only response was, "You lose." He does very little in the realm of increasing government control or production. As a matter of fact, he decreases the amount that the government is involved in business. With this, car production skyrockets. Half of Americans own cars, and American companies are producing over half of the world's manufactured goods. With all this change, there's a thought process in society of whether we're going to stay with traditional fundamental values or adapt to a new modern way of life. In the terms of prohibition, many Americans thought that banning alcohol was infringing on their individual belief. Although those that were willing to manufacture, transport, or sell this illegal alcohol made large profits providing it to the general public. Speaking of fundamentalists versus modernists, Tennessee passes a law banning evolution being taught in public schools. The ACLU, a new organization at this time, does a survey and asks if there's any Tennessee teachers that are willing to challenge this law. One man by the name of John Scope steps forward a science teacher and football coach in Tennessee, he agrees to teach evolution to challenge the law. He is then fined and loses his position, and the court case begins. The ACLU selects Clarence Darrow to defend Scopes, and on the other side, defending the Tennessee law prohibiting evolution, is William Jennings Bryan. Yes, the man who ran for office 3 times before. The judge dismisses all of Clarence Darrow's scientists that he had called to the witness stand, and so Darrow, in a brilliant effort, calls William Jennings Bryan as an expert on the Bible to the witness stand. This court case gathered much radio fame as it was broadcasted, and Darrow asked many pointed questions with Bryan, such as whether he interpreted the Bible literally. When Jennings Bryan said yes, he asked, well, if God made the world in 6 days, but he didn't say 6 days of 24 hours. And if God created Adam and Eve, well, where did Cain and Abel's wife comes from? In the public opinion, William Jennings Bryan lost the court case. However, the judge ruled Scopes guilty and charged him $100. The Tennessee Supreme Court would eventually overturn this decision, banning evolution being taught in public schools and public colleges. Now, around the world, people aren't just worried about the Scopes monkey trials, they're worried about the Russian Revolution. Russia had fallen out of World War I due to the revolution and the Bolsheviks, and this sent much terror of the spread of communism throughout the United States. In addition, soldiers returning home from World War I brought back the Spanish flu, killing over 700,000 Americans. This is the first epidemic from natural diseases in the United States. And to top off 1919, more than 4 million workers engaged in strikes for better working conditions and better pay. The strikes, coupled with the Russian Revolution and the fear of communist spread, begins the Red Scare of 1919 and 1920. People were intolerant, fearing that communism was going to spread and destroy the U.S. beliefs. Attorney General Palmer dispatched federal agents to raid offices and anyone deemed as radical communist. These were known as the Palmer Raids and were planting the seed of when the government will overstep its boundaries. Shortly after, in May 1920, at the height of the Red Scare, 2 immigrants are charged with robbing a factory and killing a security guard. Nicola Sacco, a shoemaker, and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, both unskilled, were deemed as anarchists who sought to destroy society and build a communist society where the government owns all private property. While there was only one death and little evidence connecting them to the crime, the public determined them guilty as anti-immigrant fervor spread throughout the nation. As much appeals and requests happened, both of them were sentenced to be executed by the electric chair. To native-born Americans, they viewed this as immigrants coming in and sabotaging the traditional American way of life. But the problem with immigrants didn't just start with Sacco and Vanzetti. America has had a race problem long before. In 1911, they deemed more than 45 immigrant races, and the science of eugenics, which studied the mental and physical characteristics of different races, gave the anti-immigrant, the nativist population, feelings backed by science. The U.S. sought to completely assimilate immigrants, and in order to do this, they wanted to fully analyze the physical and mental differences. Dating this back to social Darwinism, Charles Darwin declaring that the survival of the fittest went out because the fittest adapt to their environment and overcome. They applied this to people, that some people will be more fit and win, and others should not. But more importantly, that we should not try and help those who lose, the poor, the sick, the needy. There should be no welfare, and there was no welfare, either federal or state, at this time. Now, I do want to make a point of misconception. Charles Darwin does not talk about evolution in the term that man evolved from primates. In fact, in Charles Darwin's book, he only points out that animals go under micro evolutions, such as changing colors during the seasons, specifically that of the snow fox. The picture of man evolving from ape is copyrighted from the 1970s. But the nativist agenda continued. The U.S. has always had a problem accepting immigrants, and I fear that will never end. Native Americans felt that since new immigrants would work for less, they'll take less valuable housing, they have the wrong religion, and they were too different, that they would always be a constant problem in the United States. As always, what the people felt, the government would soon reflect, and in 1921, Congress set a limit, decreasing the amount of immigrants coming to the United States. In 1924, with the National Origin Act, they set quotas on how many immigrants could come from each country. In order to satisfy workers in California and Texas who needed seasonal workers, there were no quotas on immigrants coming from nation states such as Mexico or South and Central America, but simply banning those from Asia and Europe. Roughly, it was about 3%. The nativist agenda in society also gave birth to the rise of the KKK, or the Ku Klux Klan, with the birth of Jesse Frank killing a girl, Jesse Frank being a Jew. The KKK rose to prominent in the United States. With 3 million members, nearly all white Protestants from wealthy and prominent parts and aspects of life, the KKK had much power in the United States in the 1920s. However, the roots really sunk in the North and the West, unlike that of the 1860s. The new Klan not only targeted African Americans, but also Jews, Catholics, feminists, unions, communists, and anyone else they deemed as a threat to liberty. Now, with all this extra time, with the money that Americans have, we can spend it on enjoying life a little bit more, using the money for vacations, movies, sporting events, radios, records. America's first cultural celebrities like Charlie Chaplin and Babe Ruth emerged at this time. The funding also promotes that of invention. After World War I, aviation makes leaps and bounds. Going from the first dogfights of World War I, aviators plan and chart flying from Europe to America and so forth. Charles Lindbergh being the first flying from New York to Paris in his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, took a mere 33 hours in order to complete. There's a photo of him there on the bottom right side. So the Roaring Twenties, with the traditional values that conflict with the modern way of life, we have the emergence of jazz. The recently sexually liberated women, known as flappers, donned short haircuts and high skirts for the time, are a popular icon of the 1920s. People went to secret nightclubs called speakeasies that sold prohibition during the banning of alcohol. And with the banning of alcohol, organized crime made a profit and an emergence for those willing to make and sell alcohol. The stock market soared under this as all of these people were buying products on credit. Stock market was, some might say, more volatile than GameStop or AMC. And so we see this in the literature of the time. Predominantly F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, which some places will even ban during this time, as they felt it demonized traditional values. Moral codes such as the Hays Code were put in, prohibiting movies, books, magazines, and cartoons from portraying public affection, adultery, or portraying clergy in a negative way. This caused many writers like Ernest Fitzgerald and F. Ernest Hemingway to leave the United States and become expatriates. Now, with the role of women being recently liberated and the massive amount of economic opportunity from World War I, we see a great migration of African Americans coming from the southern states to the northern states in areas specifically of Chicago and New York City. The industrial jobs there provided better pay, better educational opportunities, better health, and escape from many of the dangers of living in the southern states. To continue on this, the rise of nativism forces a man by the name of Marcus Garvey onto the scene, who prompted a movement for African independence, self-reliance. He promoted a movement of Back to Africa, selling tickets for $500 on the Black Star liner, promising any African Americans that they could take their family back to Liberia. He sold these tickets to about 5,000 African Americans. W.E. Du Bois called him out, saying he was nothing more than a manipulator. And when these African Americans arrived at the port to board the Black Star liner to go to Africa, they found that there was no boat on the dock, and it was simply a scheme for money. Marcus Garvey would be arrested, sued, and then deported for this fraud. We see the rise of African American culture in the U.S. during the 1920s, jazz coming out of Harlem and the speakeasies becoming very famous and spreading across America is almost a hallmark and a staple of the 1920s. With the Great Migration ceasing, Americans having to worry about European immigration, it left opportunities for African Americans to have a better chance at success, not having to compete with immigrants coming over from Europe. Within the Harlem Renaissance, we have famous authors such as Louis Armstrong, the most notorious jazz player, writing hit records such as What a Wonderful World, and Bessie Smith, known as the Empress of the Blues. To Americans, the Harlem was a vibrant home for Black culture. It was the rejection of old stereotypes. Writers expressed joys and the pains of being Black in America, as did Langston Hughes in his poems, famously saying, "Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly." We have other writers coming from the Harlem Renaissance, such as Claude McKay and Zora Neale Hurston, who write in great detail about the pains and joys of being Black in America. So in 1928, When Calvin Coolidge announced that he would not run for president again, Herbert Hoover emerged as his successor. He made a fortune in mining after World War I and gained fame by sending food overseas. As Secretary of Commerce, he felt that prosperity in the 1920s, poverty would soon vanish because everyone was doing so well buying on credit. But after World War I, the U.S. as a nation went from a debtor owing money to a creditor nation lending money out to other nations. However, for most Americans, they stayed in debt and merely feeding it more by buying on credit. Unfortunately, on one Tuesday afternoon in 1929, some banks in England started closing. Panic set. People started selling all of their shares in stock. And soon after that, more and more started selling, causing a panic. And the U.S. economy was quickly spiraling down out of control. The unequal distribution of wealth meant that you could be a millionaire one day and you could wake up October 30th broke and in debt. America had almost reached a point where you could no longer sell cars and buy. You had to find a new market or simply lose. That's all for this time. Thank you for tuning in. Join us next time when we talk about the Great Depression in America, or as my favorite student once called it, the Big Sad. Until next time, I love you, I'm proud of you, and thank you for joining Coach Cloaker's Classroom.